Hey there, so no collab this week unfortunately, as it fell through, but I've got a different collab coming next week, so don't worry. Back to this week, and this rather audacious title I've put up. Let me clarify what I intend to discuss. In ethics, there is a much lauded theory which governs the morals of war. It is called just war theory, and it is my intention to apply it to the wars waged by Celestia and Luna, in order to see whether she is a better judge of when war is justified, and how to proceed in war, than our current world leaders. For the sake of ease, I will refer to Celestia only, but you can imagine an implicit Luna as well, in all statements. More specifically, we will be looking at the war against Sombra, as the war against Discord is a civil war, and those are not covered in just war theory. And, just for fun, I will compare Celestia's actions to those of recent world leaders along the way. First though, we must describe just war theory. The theory is the culmination of the work of Augustine, Aquinas, Grotius, and many more besides, and has had a profound influence on modern legislation, such as the Geneva Convention. Its criteria for a just war is split into three parts: just ad bello, just action in the run-up to war; just in bello, just action during the war; and just post bellum, just action after the war's end. Each of these parts has additional steps to identify whether the war is justified, and it will be these which we shall measure Celestia's actions against. Without any further ado then, we shall begin with just ad bello.
Even my knowledge of the Empire is limited. But what I do know is that it contains a powerful magic. 1,000 years ago, King Sombra, a unicorn whose heart was black as night, took over the Crystal Empire. He was ultimately overthrown, turned to shadow, and banished to the ice of the Arctic North. But not before he was able to put a curse upon the Empire. A curse that caused it to vanish into thin air. If the Empire is filled with hope and love, those things are reflected across all of Equestria. If hatred and fear take hold, which is why I need your help finding a way to protect it.
The first article in Ad Bello is that war must be waged with a just cause. As we can see from the clip, freeing a society from slavery is clearly a just cause by anyone's standards. Point Celestia. Meanwhile, in the Syrian Crisis, the war proposed by Obama is in order to prevent the use of chemical weapons, which are certified war crimes. Since a UN report has confirmed that chemical weapons have indeed been employed by the Syrian government on civilians, we can acknowledge that there is indeed a just cause for intervention. Point Obama. Next is right intention. The state must declare the war with only the just cause in mind. To this end, Celestia falls down. She says, if the Empire is filled with hope and love, then those things are reflected across all of Equestria. If hatred and fear take hold, proving that she wants to save the Empire in order to save Equestria, and not for the just cause itself. I know this clip derives from her later campaign using Twilight, but surely if she felt this way now, she would have had similar intentions when attacking 1,000 years ago. This is a failing, but given her plight it is understandable, and the just cause is still held in high regard throughout, so it is forgivable. Meanwhile, Obama can be said to have ulterior motives of his own. If the Assad regime is replaced with more amicable, even grateful Syrians, then they will make them far more profitable trading partners. Additionally, Obama's popularity is falling, so a successful just war would be exactly what he needs to get the public back on his side. With this in mind, Obama fails this evaluation. Next is proper authority. This can be skirted over, since all it dictates is that a war can only be declared by legitimate governments. In Celestia's case, we have too little information, so we have to assume that her government is legitimate, and in Obama's case, we know it is. Article 4 is that war must be a last resort after all other peaceful means have been attempted. In Celestia's case, I think this is true. After all, it seems impossible to reason with Sombra, since he can't do anything except, say, crystals, which wouldn't be particularly useful for peace talks. Additionally, And on a more serious note, by all counts, he appears to want to hold on to power by any means necessary, so defeating him in battle was the only way to save the Empire. Obama, meanwhile, can be seen as following all peaceful avenues also. After the Russia-US deal fell through, Syrian opposition refused to meet for peace talks until Assad was dealt with, thus making war against one of the rival factions unavoidable. Probability of success is next on the agenda, stipulating that war can only be declared if there is a realistic possibility of victory. Lost causes are seen as unjust throwing away of soldiers' lives. For Celestia, this is no issue. As far as we have seen, Sombra's residents were no army, so there is no way he could have stood up to the combined might of Celestia, Luna, and the Royal Guard. Obama also passes this measurement, as the US forces are both larger and better equipped than both Syrian armies combined. The final measurement in Ad Bello is proportionality. Did the goods achieved by the war outweigh the inevitable evils? This is, like many of the other articles, subjective. However, I think a good estimate is still possible. For Celestia, the potential goods are freeing an empire from servitude, bringing to justice a tyrant, and saving the rest of Equestria from the effects of the empire's reflection. The evils are the potential death of the only rival combatant, Sombra, and any civilians who remain close to the palace, such as Sombra's personal slaves. Weighing this up, I think it is clear to see Celestia made the right call, since she could not have known that Sombra would trap the inhabitants in a curse which removed them from time for 1,000 years. Obama, meanwhile, has a more complicated sum to weigh up. The potential goods are saving a country from an oppressive regime, bringing a tyrannical party of rulers to justice, ending a 2.5-year-long war, gaining a potential trading ally, and restoring his public image. The potential evils are provoking the government into suppressing civilians even more, causing a large degree of deaths to both soldiers and civilians, if the intervention fails, complicating and elongating the civil war, if Assad win, creating a possible enemy state. Clearly, the proportion is more balanced, and Obama is less in the right. However, were a sufficient number of states to join the cause, such that Syria surrendered with no need for bloodshed, the proportion would change drastically in Obama's favour. Thus it can be argued both ways. In the first category, then, Celestia is the clear victor, making the right call almost perfectly every time. Obama, however, did not do too badly, only slipping up once or twice. Next we turn to Just in Bello. Since the International Syrian War has yet to take place, thankfully, we will compare Celestia's actions to that of Prime Minister Blair and President Bush in the Iraq War. First is to observe all international laws governing weapons. In MLP, we do not know if such laws exist to be broken, so we should assume that they don't. In Iraq, 2004, white phosphorus, an incredibly agonizing chemical weapon similar to napalm, was used against insurgents by the US military. This is an unacceptable war crime. Clearly then, Celestia has taken the lead in just action during war. Article 2 is discrimination. Soldiers may only fire upon other soldiers. Unarmed and surrendering combatants must not be harmed. For Celestia, we can only assume no civilians were hurt in the attack, as the flashback scene depicts an accurate use of the elements against Sombra.
He was ultimately overthrown, turned to shadow, and banished to the ice of the Arctic North.
This means they could not have targeted anything else. I need not remind anyone of the numerous examples of civilian casualties throughout the Middle East due to Western intervention, including Iraq. Needless to say, the US and UK leadership failed this test also. Article 3 is proportionality again. This time it refers to the use of force relative to the situation, so not using an atomic bomb to kill a single hostile combatant, for example. With Celestia, the element's power is outweighed by the power of Sombra's dark magic, so their use is indeed proportional. In Iraq, white phosphorus, air raids, you name it. Another failure for just warfare by the West. 4 is proper peaceful treatment of prisoners of war. They are no longer combatants, and thus must be treated as civilians. Celestia captured no prisoners of war, so this does not apply to her. As for the West, waterboarding. Thus, Celestia outshines us once more. The 5th article stipulates no methods dubbed as mala in se, or evil in themselves, may be used. This includes such atrocities as genocide, treachery by posing as humanitarians, and conscripting captured soldiers. Celestia can be seen as using no such methods. The West, on the other hand, can be accused of indiscriminate bombing of Iraq. Clearly, Celestia is in the right again. Finally, Article 6 dictates that there can be no reprisal. This means if one country breaks the jus in bello articles, another is not justified in doing so in retaliation, and so stoop to their level. Celestia nowhere commits the crime somewhere it does, so she must be excused. The West, meanwhile, used this very idea of retaliation to terrorist attacks in order to break articles of just war themselves, for example with waterboarding prisoners of war. Again, Celestia proves more just. During wars, then, Celestia appears the supreme, unquestionably just ruler, while those of the West are as unjust as conceivably possible. Finally, we shall look at the just post-bellum. Firstly, the peace talks must be fair and publicly proclaimed, having been agreed upon by both parties. In Celestia's case, this was not possible, as the Empire essentially fled with Sombra. However, the treatment of the Empire 1,000 years later seems to demonstrate she lives up to this. The Western leadership, meanwhile, falls far short, stipulating ridiculous reparations to Iraq, confiscating its oil, and dictating these peace arrangements, with no chance of compromise. Celestia, again, is the most just. Citizens' rights must be upheld in the defeated kingdom. This certainly happens when Celestia eventually dethrones Sombra via her proxy Cadence. The West finally secures a just victory here as well, as the peace treaty with Iraq, the Memorandum of Understanding between the United Nations and the Republic of Iraq, stipulates that they agree to respect the Articles of the United Nations, which includes human rights. The next few articles, 3 to 6, refer to just punishment, and can be summarized together as follows. Soldiers, civilians, and leaders must be dealt with separately. Leaders of both sides guilty of war crimes must be tried, likewise with soldiers. Furthermore, civilians must be immune from most punishments, such as economic sanctions, so the country is not crippled. For Celestia, there is no punishment, as Sombra is killed in battle, not afterward. The Western leaders, meanwhile, fail to prosecute and actively try to hide the various war crimes they had committed, and thus are guilty of injustice once more. Finally, Article 7 requires rehabilitation to take place, in order to generate a just institution to replace the corrupt party which was defeated. Celestia achieves this wonderfully with the return of the Crystal Princess, Cadence. The West, meanwhile, can be praised for attempting to instigate such reforms, which the Iraqi government promised to employ. However, their provisions were not strong enough, and few reforms actually took place in practice. In conclusion, the Western powers have demonstrated a relatively unjust record of international conflict, with only a few methods being just. This mars the comparatively just methods employed in deciding upon war most recently demonstrated by Obama. Celestia, meanwhile, consistently maintains justice both before, during, and after wars. Therefore, I feel justified myself in claiming that the ruler most qualified to deal with the Syrian crisis, were she a possibility, is Celestia, Princess and ruler of Equestria. Thank you for watching. Sorry we got so heavy back there. War is a nasty business. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed yourself. Do you think I went too far, or do you agree Celestia really is the mare for the job? Let me know in the comments. Until next time then, this is Nightsphere the Gnostic. Goodbye.